Do you know what the really fucked up thing is? That isn't the worst welcome people can get from our town. Some don't survive it. We didn't sustain any serious injuries from the encounter. My mom counts us lucky in that regard. We spent the night in the station. Chuck went over some history about the town and suggested they go to the library for more information. Not having anywhere else to go, my parents took him up on his advice. As far as I know, the town librarian is still Alice. I've mentioned her briefly in some older posts. At that time, however, the position belonged to a man by the name of Harold. Some called him Old Harry because of both his age and how furry he appeared. I remember seeing him around growing up. He was always nice, even when I got rowdy, as I was known to do. He was someone I never had an issue with. As a matter of fact, you would have been hard-pressed to find anyone with a negative thing to say about him. "Can I help you?" he asked, glancing up from some paperwork as my parents entered the library, making the bell ring. They explained things to him, and he was happy to help. "I'm happy you came out of it all right," he said. "Damn shame that some aren't so lucky. Anyway, I have something in the back that'll help you." He left and came back with a book full of different runes meant to deal with the creatures in town. Over the next couple weeks, they copied it, learning both the names of the various monsters in town and the right way to deal with them. If you're wondering why the pages of the book didn't get scanned and copied, the reason is odd. Every time the book had been scanned or even photographed, it always looks distorted. In other words, if it is to be copied, it can only be done so by hand. Harry would have made copies of it had it not been for his arthritis flare-ups. Thank goodness Alice was able to do that later. She's like a human printing machine. My parents memorized its contents pretty quickly. The next step was acquiring weapons. Before Carl became the owner of the town's weapon shop, it was owned by a guy named Bill. He was super strict and wouldn't let anyone who he thought might cause trouble near the shop. Of course, this meant I'd get chewed out by him if I even did so much as glance at the place. My parents bought new weapons from the shop. They came into town with a large amount of cash, so they did have money to spend. In spite of Bill's strictness, the good thing about the shop was he didn't bother with any paperwork when selling. Don't get me wrong, normally I'm in favor of going through proper channels. However, when you're dealing with hostile cryptids, among other things, background checks only serve as a roadblock to ensuring one's safety. That isn't to say Bill sold them to just anyone. If he thought someone was off, he wouldn't sell them any weapons. This could have been such as if he suspected someone of being a hard drug user or wanting a gun to rob people with. Luckily, he didn't get such vibes from my parents. They were able to purchase several handguns, knives, and high-powered rifles from him. After that, they went home and then drew runes on the weapons and ammo. The only thing left for them to do at that point was to find work. My parents' line of work fell into the blue-collar category. They accepted freelancing jobs and would do them around town. It made their schedules pretty inconsistent, but they were happy to have money coming in. I remember one weekend I spent alone because they were doing renovations on someone's house. They told me they were really pushing to finish it and actually had to sleep in it to get the job done. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of fucked things up for them. Sure, people would still ask them for favors, But when your kid is practically a damn psycho, people tend not to reach out to you as much. Not to mention, babysitters are a lot more hesitant to take you up on job offers. Finding ones willing to deal with me was a challenge in itself. Still, despite that, they made enough for us to live in relative comfort. By Thanksgiving, we were already settled in. They even managed to make some new friends around town. Among them were the Formagios, the owners of the town's local pizza place. Although they were adjusting to life in town fairly quickly, there were still some close calls. They told me about several of them. There was one where my dad had to save my mom from one of the long-tongued creatures in town. She thought the coast was clear to get something from the car and found it waiting for her on the roof. My dad thankfully was downstairs at the time and heard her choked cries for help. With his heart racing, he grabbed a gun and proceeded to blast that thing to pieces. Eventually, after taking a lot of damage, it let my mom go. My dad wasn't done with it, though. His fear and worry gave way to anger, and he didn't stop until it was no longer moving. After that, he checked on my mom. Thankfully, she was all right, aside from some light neck bruising. My mom returned the favor when my dad was attacked by a return. That's what the people in town with glowing eyes are called. One managed to get into a house that my parents were working on by climbing in through an open window. While my mom was inspecting something in another room, my dad was attacked by them. They tried strangling him. My mom came back to where my dad was to see this. Adrenaline spiking, she grabbed a hammer and used it to slam them in the back of the head. My dad actually had to pull her away from them. By then, its jittery movements were now just dying twitches. My dad didn't admit it, but my mom could tell that he was shaken up by it. She was as well. Due to these two incidents, they became a lot more careful. It was especially difficult when I was little. Often, I wanted to play outside during times it would be especially dangerous. I would nearly give my parents heart attacks because they couldn't find where I was and thought something had taken me. They had to save me from spider creatures one time that tried to carry me off. However, they tell me nothing compares to what happened during one Christmas Eve.